What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, August 16th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and whatever other insanity is in store for us as we watch our nation tear itself apart. Everybody is still trying to exploit Charlottesville for their political agendas, and they're trying to turn this into another nail in President Trump's coffin. Nobody's reporting the actual facts about what's going on. It's just all about, only white supremacists supporting Donald Trump. He ran. The only reason he won the election was the white supremacists. His slogan, Make America Great Again, or America First, was really code language for Make White America Great Again. And then they're just spinning it as hard as they can to just somehow make this his fault and to demonize everybody who supported Donald Trump. And I guess the plan here is they're going to make people embarrassed to vote Republican next year as the Democrats try and grab Congress, because they don't really have a platform to run on. They don't even really have a focused leadership at this point. Of course, we all understand what Trump meant by America First, and that is that the needs of our country and then our people take priority over anything else that's going on in the rest of the world. And, of course, the liberal globalists absolutely hate that. Now, over at InfoWars, they're basically saying this is all controlled opposition. More and more people are coming forward and saying this is staged. And the plan here is to paint all Trump supporters as racist and white nationalists, even though a lot of black people voted for Donald Trump. But the facts don't really matter here. Oddly enough, a group of black Christian and intellectual leaders at a press conference at the Center of Urban Renewal and Education came on out and defended President Trump from accusations that he's responsible for the racial division in our country, pointing out accurately that we were seeing this stuff happening all during the Obama presidency and certainly during the Hillary campaign. They were playing that race card just as hard as they could, and this is just a continuation of that same policy. So even the black leaders aren't falling for it. Everybody's seeing through it. We've seen so many of these political PR stunts. Another story coming out, this one over in newstarget.com. Unite the Right, which is the organization that started all this ruckus, was actually staged by the left. And more people are picking out that this guy who started it all, Jason Kessler, he was part of the supporting the Obama campaign. He was an organizer for the Occupy movement. He was an Obama supporter right up to the start of the new year. And then all of a sudden he transfers over to the other side and he sets up this Unite the Right. And unfortunately, Republicans are not realizing this guy is luring them into a public relations trap, because they're going to get him into these violent confrontations. The corporate media is going to demonize the right and just tarnish them as hard as they can, and then tarnish Donald Trump for daring to say both sides were engaged in violence, which we all saw with our own eyes. But the idea is that either Donald Trump is going to condemn all the white people in this country and not mention all the others like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, or he's racist and he has got to go. Now, more information is coming out about what actually happened over there. Twitter stream is out there saying that apparently the FBI is admitting that there were undercover informants in those rioting crowds, and no, they will not be brought up on any charges because that was their job. That was their job to do. And the reality here is this has nothing to do with race. This is all political. They're trying to mask it with racism because they figure that's going to pander to the various groups like blacks and Hispanics and so forth and so on. It's got nothing to do with that. It's political. And Sean Hannity came on out basically saying the Democrats are trying to stir up as much racial tension in this country as they can. And they're doing it because they want people to believe that the only reason Donald Trump won the election was because of white people, and everybody normally, they would have loved Hillary, and forget about all the dead bodies and the crimes and the corruption. Who cares about that kind of stuff? You know, it's only Donald Trump's presidency was won by racism. And what is really pathetic is we're seeing a Democratic Party, we're seeing liberals who are willing to tear this country apart, cause fires, rioting, already deaths, just to win an office, just to garner a few more votes. But they've got nothing else to work with. They don't really have a message or a platform or a philosophy anymore. Hillary's campaign took the Democratic Party and broke it apart into the Bernie Sanders versus Hillary supporters, and nobody's got a real idea of anything that's going to sell to the voters. I mean, they're coming out with a new hip slogan, a better deal, a better this, you know, trying to go back to the Roosevelt New Deal image, but it's not getting traction with the American people, who are just sick and tired of all the lies, fraud, deception, war, poor economy, crumbling infrastructure, and this awareness that they are just being played with by all these political operatives over and over and over and over again. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates just now rejoining our network, and we are talking about the aftermath of Charlottesville and the upcoming demonstrations. This is not over. They're trying to turn this into just an absolute sweeping movement all across the country. Violence, vandalism, injury, death, just to win a few more votes next year, they hope. And apparently some financial connections are surfacing between these various groups. And again, George Soros, we know he's funding Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And if you really go back, that you follow that money train on back, you start to find a lot of the same people involved in the Ukraine overthrow are working behind the scenes now to overthrow our government and get President Trump out there. And I guess somewhere out there, they're still dreaming that, you know, getting rid of Trump is going to put Pence in the White House, but that's not good enough. They're going to have to bring the whole thing down so that Empress Hillary can finally get that throne underneath her butt. These people are delusional, and the fact that they are willing to encourage violence to change the nature of the U.S. government, first of all, under the USA Patriot Act, that is an act of terror. These people are engaging in terrorism, and so are the people who are signing the paychecks. Now, here is a bizarre story, and it shows how this really is all about staging and getting press attention, because apparently a group of Antifa protesters armed with shields and bats showed up to the funeral of Heather Heyer, who was the woman who was supposedly killed by that runaway car. Now, this doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, because if Antifa is opposite the nationalists, and supposedly Heather died at the hands of a liberal who's against Trump and fascism, then Antifa would have shown up at the funeral with flowers and shown some respect. It doesn't really make sense. Their behavior does not match their stated intent and philosophy. And it's another reminder, this is all just show business. It's stage propaganda. It's not even particularly well thought out. Somebody just said, oh, we should have Antifa at the funeral and cause some more violence. Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. But if you think it through, it doesn't really make any sense. We're going to take a phone call here from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you're absolutely right with the Ukraine, but also Syria. You're pitting two sides against each other, say Sunni and Shia, divide and conquer, Hegelian dialectic. Hey, Mike, you know, Mitt Romney come out against Trump, now the Bushes come out. So, and that woman on CNN is a Republican strategist, Navarra.
Yes.
So this is that, like you said, narcocracy, oligarchy, whatever you want to call it, this globalist entity that wants to get Trump out because they deem him a threat. You know, and like I said, it's going to get worse, Mike. I don't think it's going to get ever better again, because
you know,
the call for the removal of the Jefferson Memorial now and George Washington statue on the horse in Chicago.
Yeah, it's totally out of control here. But, you know, I've been predicting for a long time a Soviet Union-style collapse. This may be the beginning of it as the nation tears itself apart. And getting rid of Donald Trump is not going to fix all the problems the globalists are having, because there are millions of people all across Europe who don't like what the globalists are doing to their country and their culture and their history. And the same thing is happening here. This idea that they're going to come on in and erase our history and our identity in order to make us pliant and obedient to their will. It's not Trump who's pushing back against the globalists, it's the human race.
That's the link, Mike, though. You said it's global. It's globally. So the globalists are behind it because it's a global happening at this, you know, with the refugees, the people who don't want the refugees in Italy, France, Germany, and they're not listening to their people because they're all part of that same entity.
Absolutely.
You know, and you know what's sad? I mean, people got to wake up now. If nobody can figure out what's going on right now, then you're dumb. People better wake up because bad times are coming. You know, these people are dangerous. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, those are the only two groups we see.
And they're fanatics. They're fanatics. They're not thinking about what they're doing. They're just being whipped up into a frenzy with a bunch of slogans. And again, a lot of them are being paid to be there. They're paid by a public relations firm to show up there and cause trouble, rent a ruckus, whatever you want to call it.
I think Trump did a great. Like I said, I think I talked to you yesterday. Trump did great the first speech, but he did great the other day with saying, you know, but he needs somebody to tell him what the name of the groups are, because until you have names of groups, Black Lives Matter, Antifa as the extremist left element, and he also should name the extremist right element. But we all know the majority of the trouble is coming from the extreme left, and I'm a Democrat.
Yeah,
I voted for Trump. But we all know where's this coming from. George Soros, Clinton, Bush's, Obama's, that narcocracy. And like, I feel bad for the suckers. I really feel bad for the suckers who believe in this crap. I really feel bad for them, Mike, because, you know, at the end of the day, first they come for the statues, then they come from the books, and then they're going to come for you. And those people are expendable, according to them, you know.
Oh yeah, the useful idiots here, and you're absolutely right. You give an inch and they'll take a mile, and we're already starting to see it. They're talking about spreading out to other areas. Anything in history that's offensive to anybody is going to be brought down. They're trying to erase our past so we don't have an anchor for our own identity, and which we're mentally cut adrift. They think we're going to be easier to control. And we have seen this happen in other tyrannical states where you'll see a dictatorship arise, and they'll just erase the past history. The Egyptians were really good about that. Pharaohs coming into the throne love to go around and chip off the faces and names of their predecessors. That's one of the things that makes Egyptology so difficult very often, is you're literally going through these archaeological sites, and they've been vandalized by later pharaohs, because they don't want to share the glory. They want the Egyptian people to think only about them. And we saw, and look at the Nazi book burning. That's what these statues coming on down is the equivalent of the Nazi book burning.
Hey, Mike, real quick on the Economic Council that disbanded. Well, you know what? Trump should take the new Economic Council and have African Americans, Asians, Latinos, whites, and put them all, people who have like startup companies, on that new Economic Council. We don't need Campbell's and Intel and, what was the other guy? Merck.
Yeah.
Who has overpriced drugs,
and it's kind of amazing because they're all walking out because they're offended that Donald Trump isn't going along with the agenda of demonizing only the conservatives, the white conservatives, for all the violence. And Trump came on out, and he spoke the absolute truth. Both sides are initiating the violence, and they both ought to step on back. No, we're here to demonize the white conservatives. That's and you should be part of that. Even though you're white and conservative and Republican, you're not doing as you're being told. And that's what this really all seems to be about. Anyway, Dustin, I'm going to cut you loose here because I want to get back to the news. Thank you for the phone call. And it really is kind of crazy. And yes, when they're tearing down these monuments, it is the same moral level as the Nazi book burning. We're going to take one more call, then I'm going to get back to the news. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. I was thinking about, we're talking about all these small details, and then you've said before that after you see the way things are, you don't have to analyze it to death, like 9/11.
Yes.
And my thought is that because it's about money at the end of the day, and all these banks have cheated people like beyond what anybody can even imagine. They've been cheated. So what do you think would happen if people just stopped paying their credit cards?
Well, actually, right now, people are having a heck of a hard time paying their credit cards. In fact, credit card delinquencies are soaring right now.
Why do we respect this system?
Because we've been brainwashed with it. Growing up in school, we got shown film strips and all these presentations about how private central banking is the most wonderful thing ever invented. They don't tell us about how the honest monetary system this nation operated, and how it was good for the people and the nation. School is there to teach you what the government and the money junkies want you to believe, which is this is the way life is supposed to be. And you go along with it because you don't know any better until somebody comes along with a really big mouth and says, private central banking is all about enslavement through debt.
And you're always saying that we should just not fill out the paperwork, don't sign this, don't cooperate, don't vote, just don't participate. How about we don't pay for the credit cards?
Well, if you could get everybody in the country to agree to do that at the exact same moment, I think it would be enormously powerful.
Yeah, it's the Jubilee thing. Somebody has to start it. They're not going to say, okay, you can have your Jubilee.
Well, no, they aren't. But we've seen these other countries, like Iceland, just declare the debt null and void to free their people. We had this other country, Crimea, just did the same thing. And we know our Congress could end the Federal Reserve any time they want by voting to rescind the charter. But government is part of the problem. They want to keep you enslaved to the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve is sharing a lot of that money that they get from your work with members of Congress. It is a totally corrupted system.
Well, I suggest we don't pay for it.
Well, a lot of people are saying exactly the same thing, and again, credit card debt is spiking. Credit card defaults are spiking. There's a big problem out there, and nobody wants to talk about it. The government is still trying to convince everybody that the economy is in a recovery and it's all hunky-dory, and yet the warning signs are flashing red all over the place that this has to come down very, very soon.
Even somebody like me could see a few years ago when Greece got their big bailout, their last one, that more than 90% of it went to pay the banks.
Yeah, and it wasn't even really a bailout. It's just another loan. It's like you've got 20 credit cards, and you max out the first one, and when that bill comes, you put it on your second credit card. When that bill comes, you put it on third credit. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of credit cards.
Yeah, that's right. It was a loan, another loan for Greece.
That's right.
And so with that loan, they paid off the interest on the other loans, so that the banks could give bonuses to themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like we can't go through a single week without hearing about one of the major name banks getting hit with another allegation of massive fraud, drug money laundering, all that kind of stuff. And yet none of them ever go to jail. Bankers are a protected class in our society. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we've got another caller waiting, but I'm going to come to you after the next commercial break here. This tearing down of monuments, defacing statues, it's the same moral equivalent as the Nazi book burning. It was wrong when they did it. It's wrong when these people are doing it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take a phone call, then we're going to get back to the news here. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, good afternoon, Michael. Michael, last night, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to Dick Morris. I know you know who Dick Morris is.
Yes.
He was talking about the deep state, and the interview he gave for 2 hours is unbelievable. What he said they're trying to do to Trump.
Yes.
And it's the most amazing thing I ever heard a guy say. What they're actually trying to do to Donald Trump, the deep state, and all like this protest in Virginia. It's unbelievable what he said, and everything he said is the truth. Because he even predicted Trump winning the election, and this guy's been right on the money in the last year about a lot of stuff. But what they're trying to do to Trump is the most disgraceful, disgusting. It's utter treason, Michael. It's utter treason.
Okay, we got to pull back here a little bit. They're not just doing it to Donald Trump. They're doing it to our nation and to the American people, because we, the American people, voted Donald Trump into that office. So any campaign against him to remove him is a slap in the face to every single legal American citizen.
Michael, can you answer my question on this, though? How come now all of a sudden this year they want to take all these Confederate statues down? Why did they do that in 1965 during the Civil Rights Movement? All of a sudden they want to take all these statues and the white man is the biggest devil on earth and this and that. I mean, it's unbelievable that you got that Debbie Blabbermouth Schultz in Florida here. Blabbermouth, but Eddie Davis. It's unbelievable what's going on here. You got this Marble-Mouth Schultz and all these other sponges, I call them. They're sponging off the government and the taxpayers, and they want us to take statues that have been standing for 100 years, Michael? What is that? What's going on here?
They're turning.
Why people are upset?
They're turning the statues into an issue, and they know it upsets people who have a respect for history, especially in the South. And what they're trying to do is all political, all dictatorships and tyrannies need a scapegoat group. And obviously for the Nazis, that was the Jews. For this nation, it's been the Muslims up until recently, and all of a sudden they're reversing it. And the Democrats are thinking the only way they're going to regain control of this country from the conservatives is to make them the scapegoat group. Everything that's gone wrong, it's all the fault of those white conservatives. Everything and we've got to take down those statues. They remind everybody of slavery, and they're trying to they're literally breaking the country into white versus black because they think they're going to get a few more votes for it. But the reality is it is absurd. It is totally absurd. And I'll give you another good example. You have all these Confederate statues about people who served in the Confederacy. And one more time, it's not about slavery. The Confederate states just thought the Washington, D.C. was getting too big for its britches, something we can all identify with today. And they decided to exercise their right. They decided. They let me finish, Tom. They decided to do something about it. They wanted to exercise their right to leave the Union because it was a confederation of separate sovereign states, and the central government in Washington, D.C. was supposed to be limited in its authority and only act as a coordinating force among the states to settle disputes and provide for the common defense in the event of war. And again, we're going through it again. And maybe that's another reason why they're demonizing the Confederacy, because they don't want Americans to start thinking about secession again, even though it's already happening out there with the Cal exit. But, these are all Americans who served in a war and they lost. Tom, let me finish this.
You're right.
Okay, thank you. Tom, we're going to let you go. I want to make a point here because we're coming up on a commercial break anyway. All these Confederate monuments are to Americans who fought in a war and lost. Following that same logic, are they going to start tearing down the Vietnam Wall Memorial in Washington, D.C.? Because those were Americans who fought in a war that they lost. Going to knock it down, put up a Starbucks. Starbucks will be hiring, but only refugees. I mean, where is this going to stop? If you go around tearing down history that offends anybody, then the Statue of Liberty is going to be targeted. The Washington Memorial. Somebody actually defaced the Lincoln Memorial. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And this nonsense about tearing down the monuments is spreading like wildfire. It's a jihad. And I'm not being careless with the word because apparently this Muslim organization is out there saying they're calling for the destruction of every Confederate memorial. And why they're getting involved, I don't know, but they are. Up in New York, the governor is pushing Charlottesville provisions that will make violent protests a hate crime. Now, as I understand it, a violent protest is illegal to begin with. It's not like you need any more laws on it. You just enforce the ones you already have. But, again, they're out there trying to just hammer this for every political advantage they can get. Now, apparently in Baltimore, all the Confederate statues were taken down overnight. They had 4. The Confederate Soldiers and Sailors Monument, the Confederate Women's Monument. I don't know why the feminists aren't up in arms about that one. The Roger B. Taney Monument and the Robert E. Lee and Thomas Stonewall Jackson Monument. They've all been removed and taken away. Gee, I wonder what used to be there. I don't know. I forgot a long time ago. Up in Brooklyn, they've got an army base is being urged to rename all the streets they have honoring Confederate generals. And now up in Washington, D.C., the Congressional Black Caucus are reviving calls to remove all the Confederate statues from the Capitol. Just erase them. Untermenschen. And the violence is continuing over in Chicago. Police clashed with protesters outside the Cook County Courthouse. The protesters initiated the violence. Yes, they're Antifa. And it's amazing to see the corporate media showing these videos where you can see it's the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa people are arriving armed and they're just attacking people. And yet the corporate media is out there saying, well, it's the white supremacists. They're the white nationalists. They're the bad people. We can see with our own eyes. And we know, of course, that the corporate media is lying. Now, yesterday I made a kind of reckless joke about how these Antifa, Black Lives Matter people are going to start chipping away at Mount Rushmore to get rid of Washington, who owned slaves, and Jefferson, who owned slaves, and Teddy Roosevelt, who's now under attack for being racist, but we're not exactly sure how. And that would leave just one face left on that mountain. Well, maybe I should keep such ideas to myself because apparently down in Georgia, they've got a Democratic candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams, who wants to shave off the Confederate monument carved into Stone Mountain. It's sort of the Confederate version of Mount Rushmore. And he's saying we got to tear it down because they defended slavery and tried to destroy the Union. No, they wanted their freedom. It was, to be very honest, Washington, D.C. that was destroying the Union by being so abusive, by going in where the Constitution did not give it any business to go. It's not like the Confederacy was a foreign country. Those were Americans there. And it's going to be a major, major effort to erase that monument, all the more so because under Georgia law, the state of Georgia is basically compelled to maintain that monument for future generations because, like it or not, the Civil War is part of Georgia's history. But we're going to make it go away. What happened between 1860 and 1870? I don't know. Guess it wasn't really important. Reminds me of a scene out of the original Rollerball where the character Jonathan E. is trying to learn about history, and it's just not available in the libraries. Everything in the library is all basically contemporary advertisement, propaganda, and so forth and so on. And so he actually travels to Europe where there's this single giant computer which contains all of the historical records that used to be in books. And now it's on the computer and they can ask it questions. And he gets there and discovers that the computer has gone quite insane. And there's this one engineer who's supposed to be in charge of it saying, we seem to have misplaced the 15th century. Like it was just like he misplaced his car keys. Well, it was around here the other day. History is important for two reasons. It tells us who we are, where we came from. It also advises us on how to avoid repeating past mistakes. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they're targeting the Confederacy, because those were Americans who decided they had a right to say no to Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. does not like people who tell them no. But what we have here is a group of historically illiterate people trying to erase and revise history. Oh, we hate Robert E. Lee. He's one of these Confederate generals. And Robert E. Lee graduated from West Point. Before the outbreak of the war, Robert E. Lee was overwhelmingly regarded as the best military mind in the entire United States Army. Winfield Scott offered him command of all Union forces when the war began. But Robert E. Lee chose allegiance to his state of Virginia rather than the federal government. He didn't fight for slavery. In fact, he freed all of his slaves. He was fighting for states' rights, which are under attack again. These were honorable people who were willing to put their lives on the line to preserve the Constitution. And I love seeing all these Antifa, Black Lives Matter people running around there about, oh, the GOP, they're white racists, they're slaveholders. Actually, if you actually go back and read the history, you will find it was the Democratic Party that defended slavery and opposed the abolition movement. It was Democrats who launched that Civil War. Democrats founded the KKK, and they opposed every major civil rights act in U.S. history. It's the Democratic Party's inconvenient truth. And yet the corporate media is out there saying, oh, the Republicans, they're the racists, and they're... It's all lies, complete lies. All right, moving on to this business council situation. First of all, I don't think the business councils were that good for the American people because primarily they were lobbying Donald Trump for a reduction in government oversight and regulation, usually to their benefit. And we know that regulation of banks and businesses has declined significantly under Donald Trump. He's very pro-business, very friendly for business. And then all these CEOs are now turning on the president because he's refusing to denounce just one side for Charlottesville, and they're walking away. And Trump first said, well, I can always find another replacement. And then he turned around and said, you know something? Well, I don't need these councils anymore. Just going to shut them down. One less thing, one less headache for him to have to deal with. Now, we are hearing rumors, and this is coming out of the political insiders, Steve Bannon may leave his White House job by the end of the week. He's sort of been sequestered away. He's been under constant attack as one of Trump's chief advisors. And unfortunately, I don't think Trump really understands that he is step by step being isolated and prepared to be brought down. So it's just crazy over there. Now, you have to look at the Iranians and say, these are people who are very smart, got a good sense of humor. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah al-Khamenei basically came on out and tweeted in response to Charlottesville, saying if the U.S. government has any power, they better manage their own country rather than meddle in other nations' affairs. And he's absolutely right. Look at the condition of our country. Rioting in the streets, broken infrastructure, millions homeless, millions and millions out of work and about to become homeless. Don't tell me the government doesn't have anything better to do than go around and go into Venezuela or North Korea or any of these other places. The U.S. government has clearly abandoned its responsibility to the United States of America and the American people. All they want from you is your money and your children. And after that, you are on your own. So, getting on over to the war zones. The Syrian army has repelled a fierce ISIS attack near the Euphrates River. They're pushing in closer and closer. And ISIS tried to launch a counterattack against the Syrian Arab Army and tribal forces west of Ma'adan in the southern Raqqa countryside. And apparently it was a fierce battle, but ISIS lost. They got pushed back yet again. And yet again, the Syrian army, in cleaning out these terrorist depots in these liberated districts, are continuing to find chemical weapons. Ooh, bad chemical weapons. See, I told you Assad was doing all this. Actually, no, these chemical weapons are made in the United States of America and Great Britain. And the Syrian army is finding them all over the place. Now, Nikki Haley has gone back up to the United Nations and once again is uncorking on Iran. Oh, they're technically in compliance with P5+1, but we know their intentions are bad, and they're working on missiles, and no, the missiles weren't part of the deal, but we've got to do more sanctions. She's out there selling the war with Iran. And Nikki, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle. And, of course, Iran needs to be very careful here. Iran is threatening to quit the P5+1 deal if the U.S. keeps adding sanctions. Now, from Iran's point of view, the adding of sanctions does violate the terms of the P5+1 deal, because Iran is in compliance with all that was required of them in that P5+1 deal. The IAEA went in just about a month ago and said, yeah, they're playing by the rules. And so the U.S. is adding on these sanctions, and from Iran's point of view, that's a violation of the agreement. They've gone up to the UN to try and complain about it. But, of course, if Iran walks out of the deal, the U.S. government and the corporate media are going to say, oh, Iran quit the deal. Oh, bad Iran. They were the bad people here. But, again, Iran has shown tremendous patience in putting up with U.S. government abuses, because even when the P5+1 was first agreed to, the U.S. did not keep all of their promises. They did not lift all the sanctions. They did not unfreeze all of the Iranian assets. Then they voted through another round of sanctions, and then another, and more recently a third. So they're trying to provoke Iran into doing something that can be spun as, oh, Iran is bad and evil and they deserve to have us come on in there and kill them. We're going to take a phone call. Tom in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Brother Michael.
Aloha.
Nui nui.
Nui nui.
And I just wanted to talk to you about the erasure of history.
Yes.
What's going on?
Oh, yeah.
And, well, you know, the ancient Egyptians, they did the same thing.
Yes.
You know, they would deface the temples. And when a new government comes in, they want to erase the old history.
Well, look at what ISIS is doing to those archaeological wonders in Syria right now. And everybody agrees that that's a terrible, terrible thing. But, oh, as long as it's a Confederate statue, yeah, let's put it on down here.
No, it's a shame, isn't it?
It is. It's a crime. It's a crime against history.
New. Well, it's nothing new. I mean, it's been going on for thousands of years.
But that doesn't make it right in this case. It wasn't right back. It wasn't right when ISIS blew up those archaeological treasures in Syria, and it's not right when these people are running around tearing down statues to Confederate war heroes. And like I said, it's on the same moral level as the Nazi book burning.
Well, I understand what you're saying, you know, and I listen to you quite a bit. And what I want to say to, I've had my 2 martinis, okay?
Okay.
But you know, Michael, you're right on. Everything you do, it's I listen to other shows, but you are so right on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Now go have your 3rd martini. Okay, yeah, anybody who can stay sober just doesn't understand what's going on in this world today. You should see me in the evenings around here. I indulge, as it were, here. Now, getting on back to Iran. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, is out there saying these new U.S. sanctions against Iran are illegitimate in principle. And again, they're coming to understand the only reason for the sanctions is to goad Iran into doing something that can be spun as justification for the war. And again, back, I think it was 2005, Wesley Clark blew the whistle, said, yes, the U.S. government policy is to invade all these oil-rich Middle Eastern nations and shackle their oil to the U.S. dollar. And the plan was going to end with Iran in 2008. And they're a little behind on the timeline, but very obviously, yeah, they're getting ready to go. Go on in and commit war crimes against the Iranian people. It's amazing. It's all about oil money, private central banking. Now, interestingly enough, Saudi Arabia and Iraq have agreed to reopen a border crossing that's been closed for 27 years. And the border was closed when the two nations severed their relationship in 1990 after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And now they're sort of coming back and saying, well, it's time to let that go into the past and let us move on forward. So we're starting to see a lot of new realignments in the Middle East, and it looks like Saudi Arabia's new crown prince is cooling on the idea of being in Yemen. I think he's cooling on the idea of being a U.S. lackey, and that might actually be a good thing. We're seeing more and more of these countries getting cozy with Russia. Apparently Turkey's Erdogan is in Tehran now. They're talking about being friends. I think people are waking up and realizing that left to itself, the United States is going to start a global war that will probably be nuclear. In fact, they were talking about using nukes on North Korea. 22 different targets to get nuked. There wouldn't be much of the country left. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, talking about the various war zones. Now, as you know, it's been part of the Israeli and U.S. agenda to carve a portion of Syria and Iraq and possibly Turkey off to form a new little tiny, easy to push around country for the Kurds called Kurdistan. And a lot of people are saying it might be a really good idea, except, of course, the governments of those nations expected to surrender land, which also includes the mineral wealth underneath it. And a lot of people are very concerned that Israel is very much on board with the formation of this Kurdish state and will obviously seek to make it an ally to project power across the Middle East. So over in Syria, Tariq Ahmad, a member of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, is saying that any attempt to establish an independent Kurdish state anywhere in the Middle East is probably going to result in more wars. So, yeah, I think so. Over in Yemen, the Yemeni army is now really starting to fight back, and they're getting their act together. And apparently they've destroyed an arms depot in southern Saudi Arabia. They basically fired on this depot with our long-range artillery to blow up all the ammunition belonging to the Saudi Arabian forces in Najran. And I can see why maybe Saudi Arabia's crown prince has had enough. It's not going very well. Not going very well at all. Now, getting on to North Korea, as you know, we're seeing all these people are like saying, you know, North Korea has backed on down here. Trump's tough talk about fire and fury backed them all down, and we don't have to go in and invade them right now. But we do know that China actually came on in and said, if the U.S. launches an invasion of North Korea, we will be compelled to intervene. And today, Russia has sent a message to the U.S., do not attack North Korea. But right now, the U.S. is so desperate for a war, they're thrashing around anywhere. Now, about a month ago, when all this North Korea stuff was first being fanned up, there were experts who were talking about North Korea's nuclear weapons development is still years away from a deployable warhead. And then during the height of the propaganda trying to sell the war, they were out there saying, oh, our bad. It turns out North Korea has 60 working nuclear warheads, 60. Just count them and be very, very afraid. And the corporate media was out there screaming about these last two test firings of missiles. And that's all they were, test firings. And the U.S. does it all the time. We've got the Pacific Missile Test Range over here on Kauai. they're always throwing rockets up there. It's never a big deal. And this thing about Guam was never an attack. It was another missile test. And the media said, oh, he's coming to attack Guam. And these last two missile tests North Korea actually carried out were described as ICBMs that could hit the United States of America, fanning up the fear. And as it turns out, those specific missiles could not reach the United States. They weren't ICBMs. They were intermediate range missiles only. You're being lied to sell you a war. We'll be right back after station identification. There we go. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about North Korea. And even though this nuclear threat thing is fading away, never really got any traction. But they're still keeping up the propaganda. North Korea, evil, evil, evil. Over at Breitbart, Michael Malice is out there talking about North Korea's evil government ruling over 25 million slaves. And then they go on here to talk about how Kim Jong-un is torturing and executing North Koreans for practicing religion. So apparently what's going on here is the warmongers didn't get any traction with the North Korea is going to nuke us propaganda, most likely because Americans, we remember being lied to about Iraq's nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear weapons and Syria's poison gas and so forth and so on. But it looks like North Korea is still very much on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list, and they're just thrashing about for a way to sell you on that idea. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Ron in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
All right. Hey, I'm a little bit behind you. I'm sorry. I tried to call in earlier, and it just kept ringing. Hey, on these statues being taken down, you did finally bring it up, and that was one good deal, that the Democrats was more in the KKK than anybody. Okay?
Yes.
If they go into Virginia, why don't they take everything down that Birds ever put up? We need to take every one of those signs on that all the roads in West Virginia that's got a bird sign or it's got an Al Gore Senior.
Yes.
Needs to come down. If we're going to take all of our stuff down, you take all your stuff down, too.
Oh, no, that's not the way. I mean, they're already talking about they want to replace the statues of the people of the Confederacy with an assortment of people of color and gender, and we're going to have statues of people, gay people who are being made statues of just because they're gay. And we had... Sorry?
Well, we can throw up some people. We can throw up Ronald McDonald or something, some Happy Meal people or something.
Yeah.
That's the same thing as they got.
I don't think I want a Happy Meal history. And again, it's all about, erasing our memory of a time in this country when the states did stand up to the central federal government. And I think that's a big reason why they're trying to demonize it right now, is sell Americans on the idea that we just go on putting up with all this nonsense we're getting out of Washington, D.C., the forced vaccination, GMO food, crumbling infrastructure, out of control debt in the economy, and we're supposed to just sit there and say, yeah, okay, I guess you're doing a good job. No, they're not. Washington, D.C. is doing a terrible job, and I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump for going along with it.
Well, maybe one of these days the white people are going to rise up and come back and say, hey, this country was formed. You go back and look through history, how many people have done all of the inventions, brought all of the stuff that they brought to the United States and everything. It's all white men. So they need,
I have to challenge that. Booker T. Washington being an obvious exception. And a lot of people. I really don't want to draw this along racial lines because it really is a political fight, okay? It is the globalists against the nationalists. And right now they're trying to demonize us, and we shouldn't fall into that idea of saying white this or black that, which is why, I'm basically saying it's, the liberals against the conservatives.
No,
okay.
I mean, I hope Trump finally wakes up. We need him to wake up and start standing up for what is right in America. All of us together then.
Okay.
Right? All right, buddy. I appreciate you. Thanks, buddy.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. And before you talk, I didn't mean Booker T. Washington. I meant George Washington Carver. If you think that only white people are good inventors, you need to talk to this guy as well. And so, yeah, anyway, back to Mo in Florida. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Aloha, my friend.
Yes?
The other caller was right on. You've got you're pretty much right on most things. I think that, in my opinion, and my view, I think that the situation with Trump is very critical. I think it's almost like Caesar. He's being abandoned, and I think they're setting him up with these banksters. Calling him out, and it's just. I think there's so much corruption. Well, I mean, obviously there's corruption. This whole economic system's ready to collapse, and he's not playing ball. I don't know if he's stupid or he's playing 6D chess, whatever it is, but I think they're setting him up. I think they're isolating him.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I think you should get Flynn back in, General Flynn.
Yep.
And just go rogue. I think he should because he's going to be dead. They're going to, if this is what's really going on, they're going to kill him, Mike.
At some point, I would agree with that, but I'm beginning to see. I don't think the plan ends with just getting Trump out of the Oval Office. I think they really want to have a serious upheaval of our political systems. There are still liberals out there who are dreaming that there's still some way for Empress Hillary to sit on the throne of the United States.
I'd be quite a slap in the face with anybody with a reasoning. Two brain cells to rub together. I mean, it's so sickening, Michael. I don't know. I think it's almost it breaks your will to see this obvious corruption, and for them to go along with it. To see the media, it's so blatant. I mean, come on, this woman has committed more crimes than 10 of the worst gangsters in history together.
Absolutely. And again,
she's going to run for what?
Yeah. She shouldn't even be allowed to run for dog catcher.
Well, she should be arrested immediately.
I agree.
That's another thing.
I agree.
He campaigned on locking her up. What's going on?
Yeah,
that's a litmus test to me. What's going on?
I agree with you. It's a litmus test, not just for Donald Trump, but for everybody as an administration and the government as a whole. They are seeing all this crime and corruption, and they're looking the other way. Now, yes, they're going to do a little token plea deal with Hillary where she agrees that she committed a minor offense, and in exchange, the Department of Justice is saying they'll shut down all of the investigations into the email server and all the investigations into the Clinton Foundation. That's where the dirt is. It's called a limited hangout.
Right on.
Yeah, they're going to admit to a little tiny crime to cover up the greater crime behind it.
I'll let you go, Mike, but I don't want to keep other calls. I will tell you, everything you say, I've checked out, and it lines up. You're not, I'm not agree with you on everything, but your history is 98% correct. And keep up the good work, Mike. Watch your backside. Love what you're doing. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. Another interesting development regarding Korea. The New York Times had come out with this story saying that the reason North Korea's latest missiles seem to be doing so much better, a surprising improvement over their earlier efforts, especially all the problems they were having with the Taepodong 2, was that they were actually getting rocket engines from a company in Ukraine. And, of course, Ukraine is denying it. Then somebody said, well, there were some Korean spies who stole the plans, and somebody else came out and said just having the plans wouldn't be enough. You need the engineers and technicians who know how to turn those plans into working rocket engines. Because there's a lot of stresses, and you got to know exactly what the metallurgy is going to be, and there's all kinds of things not covered in the blueprints that you just have to know. Well, apparently Ukraine had been threatening a lawsuit against the New York Times over this story. Now, all of a sudden, they're backing down and saying, in the interest of preserving our friendly relations with the United States, we're just going to drop the whole subject. Sounds more to me like somebody had the goods that, yes, indeed, Ukraine was selling rocket engines under the table to North Korea. And again, Happens all the time. Israel was selling nuclear weapons to South Africa, or tried to. And that's a big unknown. When we talk about the threat of nuclear war, it's one thing when you've got these countries where you know they're nuclear armed and roughly how many weapons they've got and what their capabilities are. But you've got Israel, which has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we know they were trying to sell a nuclear weapon to the former government of South Africa. And I don't think Israel was content with just one customer. We don't know who else Israel has sold nuclear weapons to. And there could be a large number of warheads out there, deliverable nuclear bombs, where we don't know where they are or who has them. And that makes for a much more unstable situation. Now, Vice President Pence is down there touring South America, and apparently he's cut a lot of his trip off short, citing the Venezuelan crisis. And he's out there making these draconian statements. We're going to bring the full measure of American power to bear on Venezuela. And everybody is saying it's really none of your business. But the U.S. is looking for a way of regime change. And they have wanted a regime change in Venezuela all the way back to Hugo Chavez. Because Venezuela has a lot of oil. And they sell it to countries all over the world. And they accept any currency they feel like accepting. It's not locked to the U.S. dollar. And so Venezuela got added to that Wesley Clark list of countries to be invaded, regime changed, and forced to sell their natural resources for the U.S. dollar so that anybody buying those resources would be forced to come to the United States and get dollars. Either borrow them at interest from the Federal Reserve or trade manufactured goods and agricultural produce. So that's what's going on over there. Okay, good news. Ron Paul is out there saying Trump can't be serious about going into Venezuela. It really is ridiculous. And we're seeing all over South America, Latin America, the countries are saying, no, we don't want the U.S. in here. And part of the reason is because they remember back in the 50s and 60s when the U.S. was down there covertly messing around with their countries. Chile and, well, all of them, basic. Nicaragua, look what happened in Nicaragua, what a mess that was. Huge mess. And it doesn't make any sense to go into Venezuela. It's not our problem. Although, again, you have to remember, 3-4 weeks ago, the head of the CIA admitted this is another U.S.-backed regime change. And the U.S. government seems to be getting into this idea that they have a right to regime change other countries. And we, as loyal, patriotic American citizens, should accept this. And I really don't, because I don't think those people living in those countries like living under puppet rule, just like we here in the United States do not like living under puppet rule. Now, there was an interesting article that came out of Global Research about what's going on in Venezuela from somebody who's actually down there. And he says, what is going on in Venezuela is very different from what the corporate media is portraying. And they're out there trying to say that Maduro is crushing protests and demonstrations. And basically what's going on is if the demonstrations and protests are peaceful, the police are leaving them alone. The police only get involved when the protests turn violent, usually at the hands of agent provocateurs. And the media's down there just trying to spin that like they do everything else. Now, here in Hawaii, we had a little bit of a whoopsie. Apparently, last night, a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter crashed off the west coast of this island. They're still searching for any possible survivors, but unless the pilot was able to auto-rotate down, well, they haven't found anybody yet. We're keeping an eye out for that one here. So let's talk about the economic news. China's steel output has hit an all-time high, which is setting the stage for an escalating trade war. Because steel is a major commodity, and the U.S. is not the powerhouse producer it used to be. Now, this next article got Claire and my attention because we all know prices for new cars and leasing have just plummeted lately. You see those commercials, you look at those deals, and you say, oh, wow, this would be a wonderful time to buy a new car. And if only I had the money to do it. Well, it turns out that a lot of people, as their leases expire, they're not renewing. And all of a sudden, there's a glut of lease cars that are being put on the used car market, and there are so many of them, it's driving used car prices down. They're at the lowest level since 2009. And Claire and I are going to take a look around. The reason we don't lease or buy a new car is we don't want to incur any more debt. But our little 18-year-old Honda out there, we only paid $2,000 for it. And if we could find another deal like that, we can squeeze that out of our budget. And we do need to. The thing is falling apart. Story coming out of having some problems with this. Oh, there we are. Story coming out of boy, something's wanky with this. I can't get the credit on it. Anyway, we've been 10 years since the big financial crisis, coming up on 10 years. Because the 2008 crash began with the runaway bundling subprime mortgages. It started in 2007. So we're already into the window of the 10-year anniversary. And unfortunately, the financial elites have learned nothing. They're making the same mistakes all over again because it makes them a lot of money. And when it falls apart, somebody else pays the price. You. Now, Michael Snyder is out there saying it is time to shut down the Federal Reserve to get rid of the boom and bust cycle. A lot of people think that it's just inevitable. You're going to have a boom and then a bust and a boom and a bust. It's the nature of banking. No, it isn't. It's actually an artificial creation. It's a giant heartbeat that pumps the real wealth of the nation out of your hands and into the hands of the bankers. They'll swell the money supply. Credit is easy. People can borrow. People buy things, build things, start things, factories, homes. Then the bust comes. And people default on their mortgages and their loans, and the bankers simply take possession of all of those properties and get ready to sell them to the next generation as part of that boom cycle. That's how it's all working. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Frank in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Michael. You were talking about North Korea earlier?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Mike, I honestly think, and this is going to be controversial, I think North Korea is doomed. I honestly believe the big boys at the top that control these nation states are looking at North Korea as a pie, and like you say, a piece of the action. I think if China signs on with Russia, the United States, and Europe and other nations, they're all going to have a piece of the action of North Korea. What they'll do is China will be promised maybe the infrastructure rebuilding and the central bank. The United States will be promised opening to corporate America and, pushing through a skinnier version of the TPP. I think Russia's involvement in it might be allowing the drilling off to the Korean Peninsula. So there's going to be a lot of piece of the action be spread around, and I don't think that they want to keep North Korea divided. I think that the big globalists want to unify the country, create 30 million new consumers, create them into a debt slavery system like we're in today right here in America. Mm-hmm. And all these nation states are going to get a piece of the action. They've done it with Germany. Remember when Germany unified?
Yes.
And then what did they do? They brought in, the euro? Remember that? And they unified practically over Europe. It's just the way the nature of the beast is. And I don't think China gives a hoot about North Korea as long as they get a piece of the action, a big piece. And they will want to do all the infrastructure rebuilding. If there's a war, it'd be a very quick affair. This guy would be removed. They'll unify the Koreans, and then all of a sudden you see China and they're building.
We're on a commercial break here, but don't hang up because when we come back, I have a response to what you just said. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Frank in Pennsylvania. And the fact is, the Koreas were talking about reunification just 4 or 5 years ago. It's called the Sunshine Policy. South Korea's new president, Moon Jae-in, is back to talking about that. He's trying to get the U.S. To get out of South Korea so he can reach across that DMZ and shake Kim Jong-un's hand and say, let's stop all this nonsense. And in terms of the economic development and opportunities that you're talking about, those would happen with reunification as well as with war at much lower expense because you're not paying for the war. But in this particular case, our war policy is make war. Because war is a heck of a lot easier than actually trying to do business and make things work. And again, what they want is not to have a North Korea that's willing to sell their rare earth minerals and their opium to the United States. They want the U.S. To literally be in control of it. And that's what the reason for the war. And again, apparently at the point where they were really about to haul off and attack North Korea, they were seriously talking about using nuclear weapons to attack something like 22 sites where they think the bombs are all stored. And that's how deadly close we got to it. I think reunification would be a great idea. And again, they were talking about it 4 or 5 years ago. And the U.S. got in and started meddling and tinkering and saying, no, you don't want to reunify. We never ended the war here. We still have to emerge victorious. Because Korea is an embarrassment to the United States and this illusion that we are invincible militarily, along with Vietnam. Because we never won the Korean War. It's still ongoing. And I think that the people inside the Pentagon who tend to think more with their gonads than their cerebrums, it's all about we've got to finish this war and we have to be victorious. And it's a stupid reason to start a war, but there we are.
Yes, Mike, excellent points. I'm just thinking further down the road why they want North Korea and South Korea reunification, not because the benefit of the people that live in those countries. It would be the benefit of multinational corporations coming there to exploit the workforce. It would be the central bank that would be exploiting the people by debt slavery. It will be the same deal what happened to Vietnam. Now, Vietnam, when they reunified, we supposedly lost the war, but at the end, my God, corporate America won the war in Vietnam. You go to Vietnam today, there are more products for Apple and Microsoft and tech that was created basically from American multinational corporations, sold to those people. They're getting in a lot of debt because they're in consumerism, and a lot of folks there in Vietnam, and I was there 20 years ago, they were rebuilding our light and speed, are in the same problem we're having here today, which is credit cards, and they can't make their payments on debt that they've acquired to buy stuff that they can't afford.
Yep. That
was sold basically from American corporations. And this is the shame of it. And I think that North Korea is targeted the same blueprint that they use for Vietnam. They're going to use for the Koreans to reunite. But it will never benefit the people, believe that. It will benefit the multinational corporations, the central banks, and the big boys. It's never going to benefit the people. And just like us here today, Mike, a lot of people living on credit, not because they want to buy things that they can't afford, it's because they want to buy their basic daily needs. It's gotten such a dishonest system. You said the money system.
Yep.
Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if Korea had 30 million new consumers that they can throw in the same debt slavery that we're in this country today? That's
but our problem here is we don't have anything to sell them. The Koreas are going to be buying their products from China and Japan and Taiwan and Russia and Europe because we don't have anything to sell them, okay?
Well, not the American people, but Wall Street does. Wall Street has a lot of, their startup corporations. If you look at China, their number one market to get in their funding is from Wall Street. That is a fact. Mm-hmm. And HSBC Bank, which is a derivative of the Bank of London, which is an arm of our Federal Reserve, any major corporation that started up in China was funded by Wall Street, and that is a fact that you cannot deny. I cannot deny it. And
I'm afraid you're a little fuzzy on that because actually Chinese businessmen have been far more entangled with the Bank of England, going back to colonial days.
You're right. I'm sorry. Right.
Rather than the Federal Reserve. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Frank. We'll be back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're going to go back to the phones here. Andrea in Oklahoma, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. They were talking about if they did use a nuclear bomb, the fallout would be so horrible. And here you are, have Fukushima that's still got so much radiation oozing from it and destroying so much area. Then you'd have all this blowing in because you've got the coastal breeze going inland. It would create such a horrible nightmare. And then I've been listening to Kim Commando of all these things that have been hacked, and she was talking about countries that are being hacked, hospitals that are being hacked, and that may be the next war. Is what she was predicting is somebody can sit in front of their computer and hack in like they did with the Stuxnet. And if they wanted to attack the U.S., we have all these nuclear power plants that they could attack. I mean, they could put us over a barrel real quick. Everything we've got seems like it's got computers in it. The car has, 27 computers?
Yeah.
And it just seems like that might be where, we won't see that one coming. It'll be like, whoa, that just, but she is predicting that may be the next thing because they can get into your computer. Well, I mean, they've made the doorway. You keep talking about, and they're constantly attacking your shell all the time.
Okay, Andrea, I need to cut in here because there's something that you need to keep in mind before you hyperventilate, and that is that the computer systems of critical infrastructure, such as power plants, refineries, and so forth, are not connected to the general Internet for that very reason. Stuxnet was spread by infected flash drives, and somebody walked into the centrifuge plant at Iran with an infected flash drive, whether it was planted on them and they just waited for it to happen, or somebody was bribed or blackmailed into just sticking this flash drive into the computer for 2 minutes. That's all it takes. But they can't sit at their computer in their basement and get into these systems because they are air-gapped from the Internet for that exact reason. Okay?
Okay.
But you're,
Thank you so much.
But you're right. In terms of communications and information, the war is already out there. The globalists, the narcocracy, yeah, they're hiring people to go on out onto forums and shout abuse at everybody. It's apparently a very well-paying job here. And yeah, they've got these cyber warfare crews that are out there trying to wreck servers, and they're starting to hit a lot of them. A lot of them are being brought down. And yeah, that's where it is. Now, if it goes to a war instead of a nuclear war, yes, nations that are at war with each other could do a lot of damage. They couldn't melt down the nuclear reactors or any of that stuff, but they could certainly screw up the banking systems of each other and shut down the communications and various other things, because there are a lot of critical systems that are on the Internet, and they all seem to be vulnerable. They've got back doors. The NSA's drilled in there. And anybody who's got that tool set, they are a force to be reckoned with. And we know that some of the NSA and CIA tools have now broken into the wild, and you can buy them on the dark web if you are so inclined.
Well, there's not enough to worry about. It just seems like it keeps going, and it seems as though somebody should be able to come up with just solving one or two of these problems before they just will blanket us with, like we've got a mountain of problems on top of us, and it seems like we need to start whittling away at some of these, and
well, I'm trying.
I don't even know.
I'm whittling away at the narcocracy. The problem is, and I've said this many times before, these technologies can all work properly, but you can't let the money junkies make the safety decisions, because inevitably they'll cut the corners because they want a bigger bonus. They want the stockholders to be happy. And again, if you look at the damage to Fukushima, and then just down the coast a little way is Onagawa, which had a similar nuclear power plant, and it suffered no damage at all because the design engineer who was in charge of building that plant refused to cut any corners. And he endured a lot of pressure. They called it a one-man war on his part to make sure that plant was going to be safe. And it survived the quake and tsunami without any damage whatsoever. And Fukushima, they'd cut corners. They decided they didn't need to put the emergency generators up on towers because, there'll never be a tsunami that's that high. And, of course, that's exactly what happened. So same thing at San Onofre when they wanted to sneak enlarging the capacity of the power station past the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It happens time and time again, over and over. Deepwater Horizon, 4 years overdue for its mandatory maintenance. It really is a problem. These things could be fixed, but you need two things. You need the political will, which means the government willing to enforce the laws to guarantee the safety of these systems. And you have to have people in charge of these projects and corporations who really are thinking the long term, the long view, down the road. Because we see so many decisions that are made basically to just, let's get this up and running, and then we'll collect our bonuses and retire, and it's somebody else's problem. And that kind of a careless attitude for deployment of anything, vaccines, GMO, so forth, has really, unfortunately, infected much of the American psyche.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to ask, because all the threats, you can't make any threats towards a policeman. You'd be arrested and they can take you and put you in jail.
They'd shoot you.
But yet, Johnny Depp talks about assassination. I noticed that at the grocery store, they had, of course, it's, the International, one of those little rags. They have Obama saying he's going to destroy Trump this week or something to that effect. And it's like, they just, here we worked so hard to get our president in there, and I just feel as though, of course, I wanted you for vice president because I think that would have been the best ticket because you could have helped him understand what's going on, and he just needs help. And if I had enough money, I would pay for your ticket to go there. It's just getting an appointment with the president because he really needs.
I'll never get past the White House Chief of Staff. Absolutely. Anyway, Andre, we're going to let you go because the phone lines are really starting to load up, and I want to get to these other callers. Jack in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hi, Michael. A few remarks. First, about the term white nationalists. We must take the offensive and attack those head on. Many countries are nationalists. For example, the U.S., Israel, etc., etc. Are they against all those nationalists or just the white? And another thing, more than half the population of America, if I'm not mistaken, is white. Are they saying that more than half of America is neo-Nazi, KKK, and all that?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying. And the reason they
totally ridiculous.
What they did is they just threw this phrase together to get as much propaganda value out of it as they could. Nationalist has become a bad word because it's equated with Germany's National Socialists. And
it
from
doesn't apply to
Israel. Jack, we each take our turn. I've got a kill button, and I'm not afraid to use it. So just give me a second here. They're using the phrase nationalist to link to Nazism. But you're right. Most nations tend to be nationalist. It's a good thing. My country, I'm going to support my country, the American people, and so forth and so on. But it's been turned into a negative word by the globalists, who think nationalism is a threat to their idea of a one-world government. Now, they're putting white in front of it, again, to fan that racism issue, as if only white people would have a desire to see this country prosper and do well, which is absolute nonsense. Every legal American citizen wants to do well, and by extension wants the country to do well. So this is a made-up phrase, and I refuse to use it. I'm just going to say conservatives. Okay, or I'll just say nationalists, but I'm not going to put color in front of it because then I'm playing the game by the rules they have set up. And if you play their game by the way they want you to play it, you have already lost going in.
Yes, I have some other terms to propose. One is sovereignist. We want national sovereignty.
Yes.
Who can disagree with sovereignty? We want to be independent.
Yes.
We want self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? who would not like sovereignty? Who would be against self-determination? And by the way, the term alt-left is very good. I mean, this is the new left. These are the storm troops of Zionist globalization, Soros, etc., etc. They use these people to attack and destroy. This is a battle between the globalists, the Zionists, and the Anglo elites for the control of the United States. And the Antifa, for example, says nothing about war and Palestine. I never heard the Antifa. They're so democratic, so leftist. So they say nothing about the war in Ukraine, absolutely nothing, or Syria. They say nothing about Palestine. I mean, the hypocrisy is nauseating.
Yes, it is.
The Zionists reserve the right to go to bed with anyone. In Ukraine, they go to bed with the neo-Nazis, but nobody cares.
Yes.
In Syria, they go to bed with the terrorists. Nobody cares. So, I mean, there are huge contradictions. I think Trump should go out to the people, should go out to the country and level with the people. Say, I cannot drain the swamp, I need your help, okay? Otherwise, he's going to get impeached or he's going to get castrated 100%.
Yeah,
So,
it may take something that dramatic because, again, Trump is trying to play the game in Washington, D.C. by Washington, D.C.'s rules, and that puts him at a tremendous disadvantage. There's clearly some kind of a dramatic event on the horizon.
Let's make a move, yeah. Unless he's been seriously blackmailed.
Blackmailed could be threatened. I mean, they may have threatened the lives of his family and just said, you do what we tell you to do, or we're going to kill your wife and kid. Yeah. And we were hearing even during the campaign last year, there were death threats coming in. I remember one time seeing Donald Trump doing a speech, and it was obvious he was wearing a bulletproof vest under his suit coat. And I mean, it's real politic. When you're talking about an entire planet just out of your reach, you get pretty desperate and you do desperate things. Jack, I got to let you go. We're running out of time, and I got a bunch more calls to get to. So we're going to switch over to Bob in the Upper Peninsula. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon.
When we have the next economic reset or crunch, whatever you call it, it's going to have nothing to do with race or anything like that. It's going to be the producers versus the non-producers. And the non-producers can take their cardboard signs and try to buy groceries or pay their rent with those. Thank you, Michael.
Well, you make an absolutely valid point, and I think that is definitely an aspect of what we're dealing with right now. You've got the liberal Democrats, the snowflakes, the whiners, who believe in socialism, that the government should just pay for everything, versus conservatives who want to just be left alone and just see government as providing the environment where we can trade our labor for decent wages and salaries, and that really is a big part of it. It's rather amazing when you hear this talk about the right to an abortion and the government should pay for it. Well, you may have a right to this or that. The government doesn't have to pay for it. You have a right to freedom of speech, but the government doesn't buy you a radio station. You have a right to keep and bear arms. The government isn't going to buy you a gun. Although, actually, at one point they did after World War II. They were donating guns to schools for the shooting clubs and shooting classes. Yes, they actually had guns in the schools and nobody died. All right, let's go to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? There you are.
Here in Philadelphia. Yeah, here I am. Yep, I heard the beep. Here in Philadelphia, we have a statue of a man named Frank Rizzo,
yes,
who was police chief from 68 to 71 and mayor from 72 to 80. And his brother was the city fire chief as well, like the politically involved family. Things weren't perfect under his leadership, and I vividly remember this time as a kid. And, back then you had the civil rights protests and Vietnam anti-war protests and stuff like that. And under his leadership, there was a scandal at the time about the police being too rough, police brutality allegations, that sort of thing. But that was worked through, and overall, the man was given high marks for being a relatively good leader of the city, and so much so that they did actually put a statue of him up. Now, some local lefties want to, quote, have a conversation about, possible removal of this statue. And all this, statue removal stuff, to me, the ancient word for it is iconoclast, which is Greek for idol smashing.
Yes.
And this is what, when one country or empire would vanquish another, they would smash their idols, just as the Taliban blew up those Buddhist statues on the side of the mountain and that sort of thing. It was a way of eradicating the culture, the religion, and forcing climatization to, the new culture, assimilation, and that sort of thing. You will be assimilated. We're smashing your icons. So, and we hear a lot about history is written by the victors and revisionist history. Well, if this isn't all this idol smashing isn't the epitome of historical revisionism, I don't know what is.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a crime against history. It's a crime against the American people because this is our history. And all of a sudden, these whiners are coming on in and saying, "Oh, well, we haven't studied history. We don't really have a clue about what the Civil War was really about. But we have decided that it was about slavery, and we want these statues to come on down." And again, it's a mobocracy. We have a bunch of people with their heads filled with a lot of inaccurate nonsense and acting on that in violent ways.
Yes, it's that, absolutely. I mean, like, the epitome of the foolishness is, like, there are even places where they wanted to take down statues of MLK because he wasn't sufficiently radical.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
whoa.
that's how out of control this is, and it really is getting ridiculous. Okay, Glenn, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Bye-bye. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right back to the telephones. Mark in Clearwater, Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Great show. Appreciate it, man. All your work and efforts. I just got a comment about the statues and what they represent. I think it's not the slavery aspect, but the cause the South was actually promoting was to counter the encroachment of a central authority.
Yes.
In that the federal government was becoming, and they wanted, and the great cause of the South was to stand up to that authority. And slavery was an issue that the South wanted to determine on its own. And I kind of believe it was going to probably phase out in a couple generations at the most.
Yeah, because when the United States was started, slavery was legal in all of the states, and when they got into the early 1800s, some states started saying it really is barbaric. We're going to let it go, and they started becoming free states. Then all of a sudden, the federal government starts saying, "Well, we're going to decide for you." And, of course, that's when these southern states said, no, this is an internal issue. We are a sovereign state of the United States.
Right.
Okay, but the Constitution says you got to mind your own business. And that was really what it was about, holding Washington, D.C. To the limits of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, something we can all identify with today. Yeah, go ahead.
What I think also today what's more relevant is actually that aspect of it, is the subjugation of a central authority and the the efforts by the South to counter that with the secession movement. I think that's more of the issue today with the left because they're afraid with all these secession movements around the world that they're trying to legitimize a secession movement as a racist movement because they're afraid that there might be some of that secession sympathy in the United States, and the left's trying to use the slavery to get their masses out to protest. I think the real fear they have is that they're afraid that because the Southern Rebellion was an example of secession, they want to destroy that memory in American consciousness.
I agree. I absolutely agree. But it's going to backfire on them because we're all seeing with our own eyes that it is these Black Lives Matter, Antifa, paid activists who are causing all the violence. If nothing else, the awareness that this is a government psyop is only going to encourage people in the states to say it really is time for us to get away from these people. We're seeing the European Union. we're seeing the European Union starting to break up, and I think we're going to start seeing the United States breaking up as well. And again, that's what happened to the Soviet Union. All the various socialist republics all fragmented, and then they remerged and formed the Russian Federation.
One more point, and I'll get off the phone with you. Do you think that they realize that the Marxists and the left, the hard left, alt-left, or whatever we're going to call it now, that they're going to ferment a backlash with the right and the white or right nationalist movement or identity movement, like happened in Europe in the early 20th century?
Well, look at all.
Do they know?
Look at all these. They keep making these horrible mistakes. They keep getting all this violence going after Trump was elected, and we're going to get him to resent, and it never works out. Okay, because they get these ideas into their head, they don't really think them through all the way, and that's why they go from failure to failure to failure to failure. Because all of liberalism is founded on an intellectual fraud that nobody has the courage to say, maybe this isn't working. We got to take a break here for...
Thank you, Mike.
All right, we got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And before I take our next phone call, you want to talk about timing? And I say they do all this violence and they get all these rights going, and then they'll make a critical mistake. And they always fail. And they may have just done that misstep up in Minnesota, in Hennepin County, where the Antifa activists tore down the county flag and hoisted their own flag in its place. Now, how is Mr. and Mrs. Average America going to look at that? Are they fighting against racism? No, apparently not. They're talking about literally taking control of the government. When you see that Antifa flag, think ISIS flag. It's the same mindset behind it. So, big misstep there. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Mike in Colorado, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm curious about something, how people that think rationally can believe a country the size of New York, with a population of around 50 million and a GDP of around 40 billion, is this gigantic threat to a country our size with 310 million people and 16.5 trillion GDP. How's it even possible?
Well, the only real threat being presented is, of course, a threat to the petrodollar scam. When Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility, it basically ended foreign demand for U.S. dollars, which even back then was a big part of propping up the American economy. And so in order to get that back, the U.S. government made a deal with all of the oil-producing nations to get them to guarantee that they would sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar and then invest that money back in the U.S. economy, which back then was a good investment. And in exchange, the United States would militarily protect these oil nations from outside interference, mostly from Israel. Well, ever since 9/11, it's become very obvious that Israel is calling the shots, not the United States government. And so a lot of these oil nations are now saying it's actually to our advantage to start trading in currencies other than the dollar. Because if you take a U.S. dollar and you bring it to the United States, what can you get for it? Not much. We don't have all that much manufacturing, and what we manufacture is overpriced junk, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. So every country that has stopped using the U.S. dollar, starting with Iraq and then Libya, has been attacked and destroyed. And that's why Venezuela is now on the special high-interest targets list of the United States government, because they have a bad habit of selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar. If the entire world were to stop using the U.S. dollar, if all the oil resource-producing nations started saying, we'll accept any currency that you want to send to us, because if you take a Russian ruble, you can go up to Russia, you can buy things with it that are made in Russia, grown in Russia. Same thing with China. And if they were all to quit that at the same time, the U.S. economy would implode. It's on the edge of imploding now anyway.
Well said, and I hope all of your listeners, for their kids, their grandkids, if they do decide to stage another fake war with countries like Venezuela or North Korea, I hope they all encourage all the young people in their life to not participate. Thanks for taking my call.
Well, thank you very much. And, at some point, to feed this war machine, they're going to have to institute the draft. And that, I think, is when America will really stand up and say, okay, we've had enough of this nonsense. Because that's really what it is. Young people being killed and crippled to make old rich people a little richer than they were yesterday. And that's a stupid reason to sacrifice life and limb of your children. It really is. Now, China is ratcheting up the war of words over Donald Trump's coming trade war. We're going to be looking at China's violations of intellectual property rights, which there's a lot of that's going on in China, but not exclusively to China. There's a lot of it going on all over the place. We're seeing all kinds of lawsuits here in the U.S. from companies that are using other companies' technology. But what China is saying is that the trade war is just the U.S. trying to dump the blame for their own failures onto China. And they're saying all you need to do is look at the trade imbalance over the last 40 years, and you will see that the U.S. economy simply isn't working anymore. And Wall Street and Washington, D.C. have no one else to blame but themselves for this epic failure. And that's another reason why I think they're trying to get a war going, because if the economy implodes and they don't have a war to blame it on, the American people are going to start getting out the tar and feathers and ropes and rails. If they can get a war going, well then, oh, well, yes, we're all hungry and homeless and you guys are suffering, but it's the fault of the Russians, it's the fault of the Iranians, it's the fault of the North Koreans. They're the bad people. Because that's what they did the last two times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, wow, we're getting really close to mushroom territory here. Now, the U.S. government has decided they're going to launch a quiet crackdown on cryptocurrencies in order to discourage terrorism. Actually, this is just to keep us slaves to the private central bankers. Now, if you look at the front face of a Federal Reserve note, it says on there, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Used to say underneath that, you can exchange this paper note for real money at a bank, meaning silver coin. But now you're supposed to believe that the ink and paper is money, and it isn't. It's ink and paper. And what the Federal Reserve wants to do is they want to edit that statement to say this note is the only legal tender for all debts, public and private. So whatever you do in life, you must do through their dishonest monetary system. But as of right now, money is whatever two or more people agree to use as a medium of exchange. Silver coins, gold coins, washers, white pretty seashells. Anything that operates as a medium of exchange with intrinsic physical value can be used as a monetary system, and has been. But the Federal Reserve, not satisfied with all the wealth they have taken from you over the last century, now want to lock you into their system. They want you to be banned from using any other monetary system than the U.S. dollar, just like they're trying to do the rest of the world. And they want a cashless society so that your money is in their banks for them to play with however they so choose. But yes, you have to give up your alternate currencies and you have to give up your cash because we need to stop the terrorists. And then we find out, of course, the terrorists are actually working for the U.S. government. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network here. We actually had a caller into the show yesterday about this, where grocery stores and coffee shops are now starting to have an admission charge, and they're predicting it will become more common. I disagree with that prediction, because I'll tell you right now, if my grocery store were to charge me a fee just to go in there, I would find another store to go to. Now, that being said, yes, we belong to a membership store, Sam's Club. But if I were going to go into a coffee shop and they started charging admission, yeah, I'm probably going to find someplace else to do business. And along with gouging more money out of their own customers, I imagine a big part of it is making sure the homeless don't come on in. Because we've got a major, major homeless problem in this country that nobody wants to acknowledge. Because when you confront that homeless and hungry problem, then you have to admit our economy doesn't work. Our economy has failed. And more to the point, our government has no right to send a single penny of our money to any other country as long as there's one American who's sleeping in alleys or eating out of trash dumpsters. Now, over in California, Caltrans is building a bigger, stronger wall in San Jose to keep the homeless people from returning to an encampment that was located under the I-280. And they keep trying to clean it on out, but the homeless keep coming on back because it represents a roof over their head and a little bit of controlled space. And we have a lot of homeless who live in the nooks and crannies of our freeways out here. But isn't it interesting that Caltrans has the money to build a big, huge fence, but no money to actually help these homeless people get into shelters or get into jobs? And I think that if we were to close the borders and stop being so generous to illegal immigrants and refugees, that there would be a lot fewer homeless Americans in the streets of our country. Does this sound like a well-managed nation? Doesn't to me. When corruption sets into a government, it grows and grows and it feeds itself and inevitably reaches a point where the corruption brings it all down. That's what happened to the Soviet Union. It's what happened in Romania. It's what happened to Louis XVI, Charles I. It's happening here and now. Now, over in Germany, Angela Merkel is starting to campaign for her re-election. And you got to admire the lady's optimism, but she's already running into trouble. In fact, I imagine she is understanding how Hillary Clinton was feeling during last year's campaign, because Angela Merkel walked up onto the stage in Gelnhausen, Germany, trying to convince people to vote for her, and the audience just booed and jeered at her. Chanted, "Merkel must go, Merkel must go, Merkel must go." And I'm sure Angela Merkel is on the phone now to those American electronic voting machine companies and saying, I need a whole bunch of those things. Apparently, the Libyan Coast Guard has issued another warning to these migrant rescue boats. This one from Spain, saying, you will stop coming into our territorial waters, because your being here to rescue these people is encouraging them to leave our country and go to Europe. And this must stop. A lot of people are still very upset at Starbucks. They had a job fair down in San Diego. And Starbucks has this liberal management that is all in favor of the refugees, and they vowed to hire refugees ahead of United States citizens for all their new stores. The problem is that the refugees that settled in San Diego have TB rates more than 100 times greater than the entire adult population of the United States in 2016. These people are carrying a highly contagious, drug-resistant tuberculosis, and I don't think Starbucks is doing TB tests on potential employees. They ought to. They ought to. I did get a TB test when I was teaching over at UH Manoa. All right, we're going to take a phone call. George in Texas, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. You know about the homeless problem? There's been ideas, sort of like I've been trying to get my congressman involved in this. It's more like and they should put this into the infrastructure bill. You know how the Bureau of Land Management really knows how to manage all that land, and it sort of like goes up in forest fires. And I would think it could be like a temporary solution for some of the homeless that are sort of like very able-bodied and willing to go back to work. I would say take some of that money, put it in the infrastructure bill to thin out these forests so we don't have out-of-control forest fires. You know, sort of like thin the forest out. Be temporary work, put some money in their pocket.
Well, it's a good idea, and there is infrastructure that these homeless people could be hired to work on for some kind of an arrangement where they don't need to have a mailing address. Maybe create a special tax-exempt category where they're getting minimum wage and they're not obligated to pay taxes, so they don't have to have an address for the paperwork to go to. But you need to understand the dynamics of a forest. Fire is part of the natural process, and they discovered that, sadly, tragically, up in Yellowstone, when they were trying to manage Yellowstone by keeping it clear. And what happened is they held back the fires for so long that it actually created more of a fire hazard from all the accumulated dried brush on the forest floor. And it was all stepped on and ground up. You thought it was part of the dirt, but it wasn't. And believe it or not, redwood trees in California will not reproduce unless there is a fire. So you got to be very careful about going on in there. And again, I want to go back to a book that Michael Crichton wrote called State of Fear. And it was basically his expose that this whole global warming, ocean rising stuff was a bunch of nonsense. And he put in a lot of information about what's been going on with the environment. And part of it was a discussion about the history of Yellowstone National Park and all of the major environmental, ecological disasters, one after the other, after the other, after the other, that have hit that park. None of them involved with evil corporations profit-taking, but so-called environmentalists with college degrees with the very best of intentions, and they still didn't know what they were doing. And they caused all kinds of problems. The more they tried to tinker, the more damage they created. So you've got to be very careful, because even today, with all of our science, the so-called environmentalists, they still don't really understand the whole dynamics of what's going on.
Well, and another thing I would like to see, more of you at start on, you try to put this on the president's desk, is more like that 2018 that all the pardon all delinquent tax bills.
Yes.
Especially for those people. Just pardon them all. Let's say clean slate for everybody.
We need to do that, and we need to also do what Iceland and Crimea did, and simply say that debt above a certain level should just be wiped on out. I mean, it's one thing to have a debt load that you're able to support and pay on with your job, but if you are in so much debt, there's no way you're ever going to pay it off. Just write it off, because you're going to lose that debt anyway when you pass away. So just write it off and give everybody a clean state, the clean start rather. The funny thing is that the higher they raise taxes, the less tax revenues they actually get, because they're slowing the economic engine down. And the ratio of taxation versus revenue actually follows a curve. And ideally, you want to be at that top part of the curve where you've got just enough taxation to get the maximum revenue. But if you start pushing tax rates higher, you start going down that revenue curve. And unfortunately, most politicians, when they say, oh, we're in trouble, we're out of money, well, we'll raise taxes or we'll start a new tax. And they don't understand there's a complex relationship between the tax rates and the revenue the government gets. When Reagan signed his tax break into law, it was the biggest tax cut in modern history, revenue into the government actually went up. And, of course, that annoyed the liberals no end, because their idea is they should tax everything and then give it back to you in exchange for your obedience.
But, but as far as, for the infrastructure, I think there should be a provision there to sort of, make a higher percentage of the homeless, especially people who have families who had their houses foreclosed or are living in tent trying to get into a place. Because even with the credit system, it's more like, yeah, they're probably making the money, but, it's more like they won't pass the credit test to get into an apartment or something.
Well,
that's another thing I noticed too.
Well, you can always they have rules limiting credit searches for public housing, and we have some of that here. But unfortunately, the problem of using the homeless, you're forgetting these are people who do not have their own transportation for the most part. They can't get to the place of employment. And, of course, while they're off doing the infrastructure work, their families are left behind to be victimized by other homeless people or the police. Plus, the repair of the American infrastructure requires a heck of a lot more than just bodies willing to do the work. We need a lot of new cement. We need a lot of new rebar. And huge amounts of material. And we have spent so much of our nation's wealth on the machinery of war, we don't have all that much left over. That's why the nation looks the way it looks. We've been at war with the rest of the world for 16 years, and we are showing the signs of living in a wartime economy.
Well, the thing is, it's more like I'm opposed to President Trump doing taken any military action in Venezuela, apart from the rest of the world. And I would just say, I would not mind arming the opposition and letting them fight and letting them form their own government. But, you know, we should just stand clear of it and let Venezuela settle their own problems.
Well, the Venezuelan opposition are working for the CIA. Mike Pompeo admitted that 3 weeks ago. This is a U.S.-backed regime change.
It shouldn't be U.S.-backed anything.
I agree. I agree. If you want peace in this world, you stop messing around with other people's countries. But the U.S. government is convinced it's their manifest destiny to mess around with other countries. George, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to the phones here, interesting story just came across the desk here. And it turns out somebody with a thorough knowledge of history has noticed something interesting about the Antifa flag. Remember, we just did the story about how they took down the county flag and they ran their own flag up there and got all excited. And for those of you who have not seen it, the Antifa flag is a black ring. And at the top of the ring it says anti-fascist, and at the bottom it says action. And inside the ring are two flags. And it bears a striking resemblance to the 1932 flag of the paramilitary wing of the Communist Party of Germany, which features a ring that says at the top antifaschistisch, and at the bottom action, spelled with a K, and in the middle of it are two flags. So now you know kind of where they're coming from. We're going to go back to the phones here. Rob in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. Hello. That's a very interesting story with the ISIS and them raising their own, or ISIS, I've already said it, Antifa, and raising their own flag. So basically, you know, it triggered me, obviously, and you also, and maybe many others, that this is our own little personal ISIS in the United States.
Yes.
About it. They can't really put ISIS quite yet here. You know, they haven't blown the whistle for the people in place to start their assembly. But Antifa is the intro to this, it appears. Very interesting. You know, I caught an interview the other day with a guy named Kevin Shipp. He's former CIA. I'm not sure if you heard of him.
Yes.
Okay. He has an hourly show, but I caught an interview with him. And he, at the end of this interview, he states as a reminder, he says, look, you guys got to realize we're in a post-constitutional government run by the shadow government and the secret intelligence agencies controlled by the deep state and others. Congress and Senate are no longer representatives of the people. Instead, they are statesmen and stateswomen with no intention of doing anything in benefit, favor, or request or demand of the people, meaning anyone's belief is in a constitution and what the United States is supposed to be and how it was founded. And basically, none of these people in Congress, politicians, are going to stand up against it. So he's leaving it in our hands. So what we do or what we don't do is up to us.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it very interesting. Here's another interesting point. Did you get this? Because you know the communists and so on love anniversaries. This is a 100-year anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917 to 2017.
Oh,
Did you realize this, right?
No, I didn't actually. I hadn't been paying attention. It's not exactly in my my calendar to celebrate every single year. I mean, you know, I've got the first landing on the moon.
No.
Okay.
Well, we can't look at what's obvious is obvious, but yet it has tiers of what's going on. See, right now they have US HR 257 in the House, and they have S 720 in the House, and with the removal of these statues, as you've already mentioned, the statues aren't literally about slavery. It's literally an excuse. They're like, picture them all. They have gathered and they're going, what can we do? What's a trigger? Okay, race. Oh, okay. What's a big thing related to race? Slavery. Oh, look at these statues. So they went after the Confederate flag. They go on after the statues. But they're taking it away, and it's also a reminder, as you said earlier, that there was people that got sick and tired, and they actually stood up against they stood up against the Union and stood for what they believed in. So they want to erase that reminder. Also, and I bring up the 100-year anniversary because basically I think the parasites in our government are coming out now saying, look, we've been in the shadows. Now we're coming out. we rule your country, and we're going to erase all your history. That's what it comes down to.
Well, I actually think the driving force actually comes from outside the United States, and again, it goes back to the globalist agenda, and it's an attack on our identity, not just our history, but blur the populations together to erase our uniqueness, as it were, in order to make us pliant and controllable. Because people with a strong sense of who they are, a strong sense of connection to where they're living, they're harder to push around, and the globalists want to turn us into this pulp of human working machines to be harvested from. And it is amazing looking back at some of the prescient filmmakers, like Metropolis or THX 1138. Anyway, Rob, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials.
All right,
back soon. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the immigration news, Michael Moore's flapping his gums again. And apparently his latest insult as of last night is he compared supporters of President Trump to rapists. Ooh, if you're a Trump supporter, you're a rapist. You're a white supremacist. You're KKK. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create a climate where people are actually going to be ashamed or embarrassed to vote for the GOP next year so they can steal the Congress. It's amazing here. All right, getting on back to immigration. Apparently, the city of Tacoma will spend $440,000 a year to fight the deportation of illegal immigrants. This is a violation of Title VIII. I think it's time to send the sheriffs out to arrest these people. $440,000 a year. I'm sure the people of Tacoma figure that money could be spent to much better purpose elsewhere than in the helping of a crime. Meanwhile, down in Kennewick, Washington, a Somali refugee attacked a police officer with a sword. Was just out in the street swinging the sword around. The police were called, 911 call. And this Somali refugee, and let's see, was saying Hussein Hassan was his name, swung his sword and actually hit one of the police officers in the head. It took 11 staples to close the wound. And yes, they did shoot him. In this case, it was definitely justified. Somebody swinging a sword at your head, you go ahead and shoot them. And up in Tacoma, they want to spend $440,000 a year to keep these people in the neighborhood. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Now, one of the things that came out of the feminist hysteria of the 1990s was the so-called rape epidemic. And looking at the actual crime statistics, there wasn't really a change going on. Yes, there was rape going on. It's a terrible, terrible thing. But it was being fanned up as an issue to galvanize support for the women who were trying to hijack feminism away from its original equal pay for equal work foundations into this male bash. We need special privileges. We're victimized here. And a lot of this is documented by Christine Hobbs Summers in her book, Who Stole Feminism? And it's a really good book. So one of the big problems they had there is they needed to generate a rape hysteria, and so there were a lot of false accusations of rape. And they were given top play by the corporate media. The National Organization of Women literally campaigned against the use of DNA tests to say, was this woman, first of all, really raped, and if so, was it the guy that she said it was? There was one famous case, Gary Dotzen, and I forget the name of the woman, but it was a young girl who was having sex with her boyfriend and didn't want her parents to know. And so the mother found some evidence in the laundry that something was going on, and this woman said, oh, I was raped, and it was this guy. And they put him in jail for 6 years until she finally confessed. And now was out there saying, no, you can't do DNA tests. You're implying that women could lie about such things. And yet at that time, rape became the second most falsely reported crime in America. Sadly, it is still happening today. And apparently earlier this year, there was a 19-year-old girl, Brianna Rochelle Harmon of Pottsboro, and she basically went out on a spree claiming that she had been assaulted by 3 men. And she just made it all up, and she's been indicted, and if she's found guilty, she could go to jail for 32 years. Because you accuse a man of rape, and even if he's later exonerated, it's going to taint him. People are going to say, well, he's accused of rape. Yeah, he didn't do it. Doesn't matter. Rape is so serious, even innocence cannot be used as an excuse. Okay. Apparently Westinghouse is in trouble because of declining economies. 2 of their U.S. nuclear reactors construction has now been halted, which, again, we're seeing all the symptoms. The whole system is locking up. Now, let's get on to Google. Google has aroused the ire of a lot of people for firing one of their programmers who wrote a very careful analysis of Google's diversity policy. And Google fired him, and they said, oh, he's upholding gender stereotypes. And that wasn't what he was doing, because what he actually said was very simple. If you have 2 groups competing for the same job, and you lower standards for one group but not the other, on average, the members of the group where the standards were lowered will not be as good at the jobs as members of the group for whom the standards were maintained. And yes, that's true. If you lower the standards, you get less able, less talented people coming on in. And he simply made the point that this idea of having lower standards of hiring for certain select groups meant the quality of work at Google was going to be in decline. And we've certainly seen evidence for that. So Google's management, which is incredibly liberal, came on out and made a big deal. And unfortunately, it's provoked a huge, huge backlash. And all of a sudden, more and more people are looking at Silicon Valley and realizing it's becoming part of the problem, that it is now taking on the mantle of censorship and control of free speech from the corporate media. And there's even a warning that was out there in governmentslaves.com that we need to start thinking of Google and Facebook and the internet as a whole as a public utility. And it has to be regulated to maintain certain standards, rather than let the owners of these companies impose their political view on what passes through their information infrastructure. Now, I'm sure in their own minds they know what's best because, after all, they're liberals. But as you value and respect the Bill of Rights, you have to understand you're not allowed to impose your view on everybody else. You speak your turn, the other people get an equal right to speak their turn. And it is starting to get really, really out of control out there. In fact, there is a story that came out of Government Slaves where Mozilla is planning a filter for the next release of Firefox that will simply block the independent media. Firefox will only show you the approved news when you're browsing the web. We already know that Google is altering their search algorithm, so the approved official news is always at the top position. Which is why a lot of people are abandoning Google and Facebook, and they're going to various other startup social media. And we posted a link to a browser, a new browser called Brave. Yeah, Brave, that was it, the Brave browser. And I installed it on my machine here, and it works really good. It is blindingly fast. And I'm probably going to change over to it being my default browser from this point on. But we have to make a point of stop doing business with corporations that think they have a right to tell us what we're thinking. And we have to start doing our business with those companies and individuals and entities that respect the Bill of Rights and through that are obviously respecting of us and our right to be heard and share information with each other. Now, over at InfoWars, we're getting word that Alex Jones is joining Diamond and Silk in a massive lawsuit against Google and YouTube discrimination. They're going for class action status, and there's going to be a lot of people who will sign on to that. And I wish them huge amounts of luck on that. Meanwhile, there was a massive nationwide demonstration against Google scheduled for the 19th. And they were going to be having marches at Google's headquarters in Mountain View, New York City, Washington, D.C., Austin, Texas, Boston, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, and Kirkland, Washington, near Seattle, where people are going to get on out there and say, you do not have a right to tell us what we're supposed to know. Unfortunately, the protest has been called off because the organizers are saying that they have received credible threats from Antifa, that Antifa will show up in cars and ram the protesters. So apparently Antifa and Google are really good friends. They really love each other. Antifa, I mean, let's be honest, they're the paramilitary arm of the Democratic Party, just like the Nazis had the brown shirts. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. The American version of the brown shirts. Meanwhile, YouTube's little censorship gizmo has run into a little bit of a problem. Their extremist tackling technology is an automated system, and it's grabbing the wrong content. It's blocking the wrong stuff. It's targeted videos from monitors, journalists, the Syrian opposition, among others. Their artificial intelligence isn't that intelligent. They're still doing keyword and context searches, and they're blocking stuff that doesn't deserve to be blocked. Of course, ultimately, none of it deserves to be blocked, but it's failing to block the content that YouTube doesn't want you to see, and it's blocking other people's content wrongfully, depriving them of their monetization. It's a sledgehammer being used to go after a fly. 2 ransomwares are back in new versions. Mamba and Locky ransomware are back in new, more robust versions, so keep an eye on your computer security here. And there's another warning coming on out that somebody has figured out a way to rig a PowerPoint file. A PowerPoint presentation could compromise your PC, which is why I never open PowerPoints that are sent to me. Even though you've got the macros turned off in your Microsoft products, there's still a remote code execution vulnerability. And it's located in the Windows Object Linking and Embedding interface. They patched it in April of this year, but the malware is still finding a way through. I think in making our software so complex, so layered, so corporatized, it's made it impossible to manage. It's become decadent. Microsoft can't actually effectively manage Windows anymore. Apple's doing barely better with iOS. Simplicity and elegance is really what it's all supposed to be about. In the early days of computer development, the smaller your software was and the simpler, the better programmer you were assumed to be. These days, on the promise that processors are always going to be faster, or you're going to have more processors, programmers have gotten sloppy. They just write the code and they figure, yes, it's going to be slow and inefficient, but you're going to have the faster processor, you'll never notice it. I've gotten a lot of emails from people who finally get sick and tired of Windows, and they'll take it off their machine and they'll put in a clean Linux install, and they're stunned at how fast it runs, because it's not dealing with all the overhead that you find in these corporate operating systems. Apparently, 8 more Chrome extensions have been found to expose you to hackers. Chrome Tana, Infinity New Tab, Copyfish, WebPaint, and Social Fixer are all out there. And again, isn't it amazing that the government just doesn't seem interested in dealing with all the cybercrime? Where's the NSA in all of this? I mean, the ransomware is a major problem. It's a major drain on the economy. It threatens people's lives when hospitals are targeted. And the NSA apparently is out to lunch here. Even if you're not dealing with malware, though, there are some very common internet scams that even smart people are falling for. Like the fake social network email, you're invited to join a social network, and it turns out it's scarfing information with which to blackmail you. Unexpected attachments that look like one kind of file format. Unexpected friend requests. The free Wi-Fi hotspot, that is a major, major issue. And unless you know the place where this hotspot is, you have to be very careful. It's very common for scammers to go into places with a backpack that will have a Wi-Fi router and a laptop just packed in there together. And to everybody sitting in the restaurant, coffee shop, whatever, it looks like there's a free Wi-Fi hotspot. But everything that you're doing that goes through that, and yes, you really do reach the internet through it, but everything that you do is being copied, including bank passwords and so forth. There is so much criminal activity out there, and yet nobody seems to want to do anything about it. This is one that comes up an awful lot. The pop-up scareware, warning your machine is infected. Call this number and we'll help you fix your computer. And it's another scam. And a lot of fake charities out there. It really is. It's open season on law-abiding computer users. The government doesn't care. The NSA is unconcerned. The NSA could be part of the problem. Kaspersky is out there saying that the Equation Group hackers are actually part of the NSA. Now, here's an article out of Natural News. Poison Papers reveal stunning EPA collusion with the chemical industry. And what they're talking about is how, even though the EPA is out there claiming that they're here to protect your public health, and they're not, and they really weren't created to. This story is talking about 20,000 documents called the Poison Papers that was released by the Bioscience Resource Project and Center for Media and Democracy that show that there's been collusion between the EPA and the chemical industry, which results in toxic chemicals being let into the marketplace. And apparently it all started back in the 1980s, where a federal grand jury uncovered a host of problems at Industrial Biotest Laboratories, which was the largest lab in the test, doing safety testing for the EPA. And this lab was coming on back and saying this and that chemical is perfectly safe, and the EPA would give it their seal of approval, and it was let out into the marketplace. Then the lab was busted for rigging the tests, and the corporations came on back and said it wouldn't be fair for you to make us take those chemicals off the market because we've already spent the money to market and advertise and package them, and the EPA went along with it. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. Now, we've been talking about how there's been an epidemic of autism spreading throughout our population. The more people are vaccinated, the sicker they're getting. And it turns out there's another problem out there nobody's paying attention to, and that is epilepsy. And apparently back in 2010, we had 2.5 million people who had epilepsy. Today, it's up to 3.4 million. And everybody's saying, why this sudden surge? What's causing this? And the causes of epilepsy are still a mystery. In some cases, there's an actual brain lesion that you can identify. But a lot of doctors are saying neurochemical pollution can be playing a role in the recent rise in cases of epilepsy. Now, here's where it gets really ironic, because we are a very sick people. We're over-medicated, we're fed chemicals in our food, and we're chronically ill, most of us, one way or the other. And it's become such a problem, it's actually created a shortage of doctors in the United States to deal with everybody who's constantly getting sick and diseased from toxic foods, medications, vaccines, whatever. So they actually are saying that there's going to need 90,000 new doctors coming on in. That's going to be a tall order because of the cost of going to medical school, repaying those loans, and the fact that a great many doctors are not paid that well when they enter the HMO system. there are a lot of doctors who have stopped being doctors because of the high cost of malpractice insurance. This is a system that's self-destructing, all in the name of greed, greed, greed. Breaking story out of Washington, D.C. Apparently, House Democrats are introducing a formal resolution to denounce President Donald Trump for saying that both sides were to blame for the encounter down there in Charlottesville, even though we can see the videos with our own eyes that, yes, both sides were involved, and the Antifa, Black Lives Matter protesters were pretty much starting all of this. But by golly, we're going to blame the white supremacists, and Donald Trump refused to go along with it. We're going to denounce him. Now, this censure is not likely to gain much traction, but they're relying on the fact that even Republican members of Congress don't want to get caught up in this because they're going to get tarnished with it. And they're looking at re-election next year. And very obviously, the Democrats are going to be playing that race card. And so even Republicans don't want to be seen as defending Donald Trump because it's going to get used against them next year. This thing is just pure, dirty, mud-slinging politics. By the way, quick little note here. We're coming up on that solar eclipse. And if you bought some of the bad glasses from Amazon that aren't truly safe, Amazon is issuing refunds to everybody. You don't even have to send the glasses back on in. But you do need to do your research very carefully online and get something that you can look at the solar eclipse with that will really protect your eyes. Okay. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back here tomorrow, Thursday, on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Stay tuned to John Stadmiller's program. A lot of interesting things going on over there. Take what you learn here from the radio show, from the website, share it with everybody that you know. We got to keep pushing back against all this manufactured insanity in the streets of America. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.